Okay, so welcome everyone. If you have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to put those in the chat, and one of our other panelists will help answer those. And any detailed questions we will have to save for last. But if you have a quick question, feel free to ask in the chat. Okay, so let's talk about medicinal uses of native plants. I'm going to go over a couple of plants in this talk. I had to make some really hard choices because there were a lot of plants I wanted to talk about, but I didn't think we had time for all of them. So we're going to talk about Echinacea in this talk. We're going to talk about Lobelia Inflata. We're going to talk about passion flower, which is a native plant. It's super cool looking. Redbud. We're going to talk about pokeweed, elderberry, and red mulberry, broadleaf plantain, and wild violet. So hopefully some of you have seen these around or maybe in your yard, and you can use them soon, maybe with what you learned today. Oops, wrong direction. There we go. Okay, so first things first, most of you might be here because you want to learn about medicinal herbs because maybe you want to use them. Hopefully that's the case. So I want to make sure that we cover our bases before we get in there. So yeah, so tell me which plants that you might have seen growing near you, so we can know a little bit more about you. So the most important way that I typically use medicinal herbs is through tea. So this is a traditional way to take herbs, is to take your plant material like this, something like this, and put it into hot water and let it steep, and then the chemicals in the plant are extracted into the hot water. It's also important that when you make a tea that you drink it while it's warm and not cold. Sometimes the compounds in the plant aren't active if you drink the tea cold versus while it's warm. So it does tend to work a little bit better that way. Okay. The other form that you can take medicinal plants is through tincture. So tincture is where you add your plants to alcohol, in this case, drinking alcohol. So please make sure you use something that is drinking alcohol, like rum or wine or something like that. Do not use isopropyl alcohol. That's not, you don't want to be putting that in your mouth for any reason. So you can use a tincture you can make these by putting your plant material into a container with the drinking alcohol. So that looks usually something kind of like this, and let it steep for about 2 weeks, and you'll get this like dark brown mixture. And at this point, the part of the material that is medicinal is the liquid. So the plant extract is in the liquid at this point. So then you can take that and put that in another container in a small little dropper bottle like this, which is what you normally see at the stores if you buy these pre-made. And what's nice about those is they're portable. So if you need to take them with you in your purse or something like that, or in your pocket, they're easy to carry around. So that's another benefit of taking tinctures. I wanted to talk about this as well. So a lot of people, when you go to stores and you buy like pre-prepared herbs, they're often in pills. I really don't recommend pills. They are not extracted versions of plants. So they're just like the dried, crushed plants stuffed into a pill normally. And they are not as active as something that's been extracted into a liquid per se before you take it. So hopefully that makes sense. If you all have any questions about that, let me know. But you're going to get a lot more of your money's worth if you don't take the pill version and instead take the extract. It's going to be a lot more effective and at a much lower dosage. All right, so before we get into the exciting stuff, I do also want to make a note about safety. A lot of people think that because herbs are technically not medicines, that they are benign. That is not true. A lot of our medicines come from herbal compounds, and they do have medical effects in the body. So it is important that you understand that herbs do have side effects, and you need to be careful about taking these, specifically if you're on a medication or if you have a health condition. It's important to check with your doctor if you aren't sure. You can always do your own research, and I'm going to give you some good places to start here today too. Okay. Just one quick disclaimer, who should not take herbal medicine? If this is you, please do not take herbs without consulting your doctor. It is very important. If you are pregnant or breastfeeding, you do need medical advice before you take any herbs. Same with certain medications. So there are certain medications like They call these blood thinners sometimes, or antiplatelets, things like warfarin or Jantaven. If you're taking these, you should never take any herbs at all. Most herbs, a lot of herbs will thin your blood. And if you are already on a blood thinner, you could double down, and that can be really harmful. Same with things that have a narrow therapeutic index, like heart medications. Those are really important, or other important medications that you have to take every day in order to keep you functioning and alive. You don't want to mess with herbs in that case. And then the last one, which is a little bit weird, is diuretics. So if you are on a diuretic medication, it's important to consult with your doctor before taking herbs, because a lot of herbs are also diuretics. So I don't know if you're getting the pattern here, but like if you were taking a medication and an herb is doing the same thing, you don't want to take those things together, because then you're taking more than you should. So it never hurts to talk to your medical professional if you're uncertain. Okay, so on to our first herb. Let's talk about Echinacea. Echinacea is a beautiful plant. Hopefully you all have seen it. It is normally used for antiviral effects. And I'm going to talk about the specific viruses that it's used for. It's also really great for pollinators. Butterflies particularly love this plant. It's also a perennial, so it's super low maintenance if you plant it in your yard. One of the best ways to make Echinacea is to make a tea of the aerial parts, so the leaves or stems, and I'd recommend doing that as a tincture, so in an alcohol, as opposed to a tea. Traditionally, Echinacea root tends to be used by herbalists, but I'm going to show you why I would recommend leaves and stems instead of the root, because of some of our scientific research that goes into why you might use certain parts of the plant versus others. Let's see, do I have the references on this slide? I think I do. There should be references for every source that I get these types of graphs and things for. So if it's not on the slide, please ask. We do have the papers that these things are coming from.
Yep, all of these references will be included at the end and also in the resources that you guys get emailed after tonight's webinar.
Excellent. Okay, so Echinacea purpura is the native Echinacea that we're going to look at. The Augustifolia is not native, so just ignore that right now, because we're talking about native plants. We don't want to talk about the other ones. And Echinacea purpura here, if you look at the type of extract, so aqueous is water, ethanol is the alcohol, and you can see that the antiviral activity, the higher the number, the better the activity, is high for, let's see, we're seeing the aerial parts for the aqueous extract against flu, and we're also seeing it high, yeah, actually aqueous. I don't know why I said ethanol. Okay, so water extract would be better here for the aerial parts, which they studied the stems and the leaves. You can see that they've looked at the root as well, and the numbers are much lower than for the aerial parts. So I would recommend using those instead. Let's see, what did I want to say here? Oh, yes. Okay, so HSV stands for herpes simplex virus, which is what this was studied for in this one. And then flu V, they studied flu A, influenza A. I think it was H3N2 in this study. So it's showing you here that Echinacea is effective against herpes simplex virus and influenza. What you'll notice is that this study doesn't talk about the common cold, which would be normally like a rhinovirus, something like that. So this one, they couldn't conclusively say that it's effective against the common colds, but it might be good for you if you have the flu. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work for the flu or for the regular cold. It just means that the study didn't see it with the tests that they use, the testing method. And if you will have any questions about that, feel free to put those in the chat. Okay, so yeah, okay, this is where this talks about that. Okay, so these extracts, this is straight from the paper, the previous paper. It says it couldn't explain the purported anti-rhinovirus efficacy of Echinacea, that's the common cold, because all the fractions they studied they weren't effective against that type of virus the way they did. But what they proposed is that maybe the reason that it might have an effect on that virus might be an immune reason. So maybe it's supporting the immune system, and the immune system is fighting the cold. So it just was a limitation of this study. So overall, they recommended aerial parts and for these particular viruses. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's talk about lobelia. I really love lobelia because it's super smelly. If you ever encounter this stuff in the wild and you smell it, it is very pungent. I've made tinctures of this stuff before and it kind of smells like wasabi going up your nose. It's a little nasty, but it does some really cool stuff. So Lobelia Inflata is particularly used in the herbal world for seizures and also for smoking cessation because it has this particular compound in it that actually inhibits nicotinamide receptors in your brain. So it affects like dopamine release in your brain by doing this, particularly when it comes to nicotine. So it has some very interesting effects on nicotine addiction and nicotine cravings. The problem with this plant, though, is that it can irritate the stomach lining. I've had some people that are more sensitive to it than others. So I'd recommend small doses if you do decide to use it because it does have that effect. And if you go in like a larger dose, you could have some unpleasant emetic effects, which is vomiting. So we want to make sure our doses are very low. Typically, I give people, I'll have little tinctures and I'll give them like 2 or 3 drops and that's it. A lot of these bottles, when you buy them from the store, they do have suggested use on them. I would recommend not following that and going way below the suggested use because sometimes they're a large overdose, in my opinion. This one's a pretty benign herb. It's astragalus, but it does say here, suggested uses, take up to 40 drops in 2 ounces of water a day, 2 to 4 times per day. If you did that with lobelia, it would make you very sick. So I would recommend starting very low if you decide to use an herb and see how your body does. So start with a drop or 2 a day and see how you respond. And then you can kind of work up and see what dosage you need. And if you all have any questions about dosage, please let me know. I'd be happy to help you if you need assistance with that. Okay. With lobelia as well, the parts you want to use for the tincture is the leaves. That's the medicinal part of this plant. I think traditionally as well, Lobelia Inflata is called Indian tobacco. I believe Native Americans actually smoked Lobelia Inflata, but I'm not sure if that was used medicinally or for recreational purposes. Okay. All right. We've got passion flower up next. So passion flower, hopefully you all have heard about this one. This one's actually very well researched. It's typically used as an anti-anxiety support. It has quite a lot of safety with it. It's believed that passion flower is effective by increasing GABA in the brain, and that's how it serves to be an anti-anxiety or it serves to exert an anti-anxiety effect. So the way you prepare this plant is through the leaves. It has this really cool flower, but we aren't going to eat that part. That's not the medicinal part. The leaves are where all the action is at. I think I had a slide. Okay, so I have some references for passion flower, and if you all want to look into this plant, it is very well researched. And so there's a lot of support for this plant being used as an anti-anxiety. I think it might also be used for sleep support in that instance as well. Okay. Right. Let's see. Do we have any questions? I saw someone in the comments said that there was a smoking mix that they used with lobelia and colt's foot for sore throat. That's very interesting. Colt's foot, though, is a pretty dangerous plant. You should be careful with colt's foot, just FYI. That is probably not one to mess with. Yeah, thank you for the reference, for the passion flower reference. There's a passion flower reference in the chat if you all want to know a little bit more about it. Ooh, redbud. Okay, so I really love this plant. Hopefully you all have a redbud tree near you. These grow prolifically around the area. The species that's native to us is, I think, Cercis canadensis, and that's the one that's local to our area. Redbud is really delicious. If you all have ever tried to eat the flowers, they're actually pretty tasty. They're very safe as well. People use them in food, so they are food grade. I use them normally through teas. So I'll take the flowers and I will either make a tea fresh or I might dry the plants. So you can take your plants and you can get all the moisture out of them and store them and then use them year round whenever you want. And what's really nice about Redbud is it's a mild lymphatic. So it's very helpful for when you have lymphatic swelling or other lymphatic issues, and it's very mild in nature. So what does the lymphatic system do, and how might this plant help you? One of those things that the lymphatic system does is it maintains fluid balance in the body. So if you're having a fluid imbalance, maybe it's lymphedema, something like that, a lymphatic might help you with that sort of issue. We also have the lymph system participating in facilitation of absorption of dietary fats from the GI tract to the bloodstream. So that's another task that the lymphatic system carries out. And then one of the ones that I think is the most well-known is the enhancement and facilitation of the immune system. So your lymph nodes, right? At some point, probably all of you have had swollen lymph nodes, like in your face, in your neck, under your arms. That's where your lymph nodes are. We also have other types of lymphatic vessels, and the purpose of these is to reabsorb essentially all the junk from your bloodstream. So if there's cellular waste, the lymphatic system is in charge of taking that and cleaning it and getting rid of it. And so this can be very helpful for that sort of stuff. So if you have lymphatic swelling, the lymphatic support herbs are normally what's called for that sort of issue. Okay. Yay. Okay. So I'd highly recommend starting with Redbud.
Can I ask a quick question about Redbud? Somebody wanted to know
Sure,
how much,
go ahead.
if you're making a tea, how much of the flower do you want to put in there?
Oh, wow. Okay. It's really mild, so I don't think there's an issue with how much you want to use. I tend to maybe put like a small amount like this in there. It has a slightly nutty flavor, but I've never had so much for it to cause any side effects like an upset stomach or digestive issues or anything like that. It is food grade, so you can have as much as you want, I think. I've never had a problem with it or had anybody else report a problem with it. And if you go online as well and you look around, like a lot of foraging websites. So if you look at people who forage for food, Redbud is like one of those ones that they regularly use. So this is a good one to use when you're sick and you have like swelling of your lymph nodes. I'd highly recommend giving it a try. So actually, so that's a really good question on the dosage. Actually, when I get sick, I use Pokeweed instead of Redbud because it's a little bit more potent. But Pokeweed is probably not a plant you want to start with. Redbud is really beginner friendly because of the safety. Pokeweed is actually a poisonous plant. So you need to really use caution with it if you decide to use it. It is a strong lymphatic support. And again, it's used for the same things that Redbud is used for. I typically use it for swelling and congestion in the lymph nodes. Let's see. I recommend a tea or tincture of the leaves. In herbal medicine, if you look at like how other herbalists use this plant, they tend to use the root. They tend to dig up the plant and use the root. I find that the leaves do pretty much the same thing, and then you don't have to dig up the plant. So I use the leaves instead of the root because they're just as potent. And then it's like a lot less effort on your part. So you can take the leaves and you can tincture them into some alcohol. That tends to be how I like to store them. As opposed to a tea, I like the alcohol. And then you can use like a drop of it whenever you have lymphatic congestion. So actually, when I had COVID, I had a lot of swelling, like right in my ears, and this really helped with that swelling and relieve that. But again, you had to take very, very small doses. If you're using a tea for emphasis, so you can kind of see what I mean by small. When I take a tea of this, I'll take a dime-sized piece of one leaf, so like this much leaf, and put it in some water, and that's enough. That is a dose. So you really don't need much. If you're using a tincture, I usually use 1 drop, and because it can be a little bit, tinctures don't taste great. What I like to do is I'll take like a cup of water, and I'll put the 1 drop in the water and then drink that slowly. And that's usually a good way to kind of dispel the bad taste of tinctures. If you have something that tastes really gross and you don't want to take it, that's a good way to do it. Do we have any other questions about anything else? I don't think so. Okay.
For creating the tincture, we had someone ask, what if you use more than 60 proof?
Ah. So I think it depends on the plant, honestly. So there are some plants, most plants are okay with 40% alcohol. But there are certain plants that won't work with that amount. So I tend to keep stronger stuff on hand for the plants that won't work. I've heard of plants that need like 60%. So I'll keep some really strong grain alcohol for those in case I need that. So 60% is like 120 proof. So that's some strong stuff. Like, you don't really want to take much of that. So 40% is like 80% alcohol. That's pretty strong. Or 80 proof. So yeah, I think that's right. I see here. Yeah, this says 75% alcohol and it's 150 proof. So yeah, double. Okay. All right.
We had one more question on pokeweed.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, are these redbud and pokeweed better on their own or when mixed with other herbs and tea leaves?
It depends on what you want to use them for. I usually advocate using herbs, only one herb at a time, so you can really know what it's doing. So if you have like 3 herbs in your teacup, right, and you're using it for lymphatic swelling and they're all addressing that, it's kind of hard to know which one's actually doing the work. So I'll tend to try them all separately first. And then once I'm more comfortable with the plant and I feel like I know what it does, then I might make a mix. But when you're starting out, I'd highly recommend just using one plant at a time so you can really learn kind of what they're doing and how they interact with you, right? Because if there are some kind of side effects, you probably want to know that. Like if you put all 3 plants in a cup of tea and all of a sudden you have diarrhea, it might help to know which one is causing that too, and not put it in your teacup. So that's why dosage is really important. If you start low, you're less likely to have problems. And if you do, they're going to be way more mild. The most common problems with herbs or side effects with herbs are usually digestive issues. So some kind of stomach irritation or a bowel issue, something like that. You normally aren't going to run into much else unless it's a very serious plant like pokeweed. You do have to be very careful with some of these.
Great. And we actually got one more pokeweed question as you were answering it. But do you use those dime-sized pieces of the leaf for the tincture too?
No, so the tincture, I usually make a stock. So you can, I don't know if you can kind of see in this container, but it has like a bunch of leaves in here. So there's a lot more plant material. That was for the tea specifically. So if you're making a tincture, I just put the plant material into the container and then cover the plant material with the alcohol and let that sit for about 2 weeks and then 1 drop of that. So I don't tend to put more in, but like just enough to kind of like cover the leaves and make sure that everything's kind of in there. So again, I'm not really certain of the technicalities of how many ounces of this, how many grams of that, but that tends to be what I use. Which is why it's always good to start low. So if you have that concentration, right? If you take just a little bit, then do you need to go up or down on the concentration? Are you making it too strong or are you making it too weak? And hopefully that can give you a little bit of an idea as you use it for things.
Great. Thank you so much for answering those.
All right, let's move on to elderberry. Elderberry is a lovely plant. Hopefully you all have seen it around or heard about it to use. It's typically used for flu and colds. I did see a study on cancer, so I'm going to show you the data for that as well. But typically elderberry is marketed as immune support. It's very high in antioxidants. So the berries in particular are very high in antioxidants. They're higher than blueberries, cranberries, etc. If you cook these berries, they are food grade. You can eat them. You can find some lovely recipes for elderberry pie if you're interested in making something like that. Typically, when we use the plant, you do want to use the berries. Other parts of the plant are poisonous, so it is important to use the berries. And you'll want to make a tea or tincture of the berries or flowers. Flowers are also medicinal and fine to use. So you can, again, put those in water or alcohol, either one. The flowers are particularly medicinal. They're typically used for fevers. So if you get sick and you have a high fever, elder flower tincture or tea is really good at helping bring down a fever. Let's see. So suggested dose 5 grams. I think I meant to change that. Please ignore the suggested dose on here. I think it might be actually really high. I think I meant to go back to a book and change that. This is one of those as well. You'd have to kind of, I think you'd have to kind of start small and work your way up. Let's see. So elderflowers are pretty light. They're also very small. Elderflowers are like really tiny. But again, I'd start with like maybe a dime-sized amount in some water and some hot water and go from there and see if you need more. Let's see. Elderberries as well. If you see these sold in the stores, a lot of times they're sold as like elderberry juice or syrup, which is another fine way to take these medicinally. All right. Oh, here's this cool graph that shows you the antioxidants in elderberry versus other berries. And you can see how high they are in comparison to other fruits that are known for this particular ability. All right. Okay. I think the link for the cancer paper, I believe we have that reference. So if you wanted to see that, you can. I always hesitate to claim that anything is good against cancer since there are so many different types and so many different things that can cause it. So take that on your own and read that paper if you have interest in using an herb for that capacity. But if you do have cancer, that's something, again, you should really consult with your doctor when you're using herbs. They can be used and support for traditional like cancer therapeutics. So if you want to combine cancer therapeutics with herbs, I think a lot of physicians are interested in that type of support and using herbs in that way. So feel free to ask your doctor if that's something you have questions about. Do we have any other questions that people wanted to ask about that? Oh, proper temperature for tea. Proper temperature for tea. Let's see. That is a really good question. As hot as you can drink it, that's safely. Don't burn yourself. But the warmer, the better. I would highly recommend that. Once it's room temperature, it's not very effective. Okay.
Dana, I can do a question real quick.
Sure.
What about folks who do not use alcohol or actively stay away or in recovery?
Yes.
Is there another option?
That is a great question. Glycerin is typically what's used. So teas are usually effective for most things. There's only a couple plants that like alcohol is normally better for. Even with the Echinacea, the water extract did have good like antiviral activity. It was just lower. So it might just be that you need to take more if you take it as a tea or something like that. But glycerin extracts are an option. If you want to make like a tincture and take it with you, you can do that with glycerin as opposed to alcohol. And that would be a water-based extract as opposed to an alcohol-based extract. That's a great question.
And somebody else in the comments suggested that you could take an alcohol-based tincture and put it into hot water and burn the alcohol off. Is that a good way to go?
I would hesitate to do that because I think one of the reasons that tinctures have certain chemical activity over hot water is that the chemicals aren't being they aren't being heated, right? So some chemicals, when you heat them up, they can degrade. And so I think that might be one of the reasons why alcohol extracts have different chemical activity sometimes than water extracts. So I wouldn't recommend that if you're seeing that alcohol tends to be stronger in activity than water. Yeah, I would recommend a glycerin extract instead. Okay. And you can also, like, if you ever make herbal extract, sometimes you can smell the difference. You can smell the difference between a tea and an alcohol extract, and you can smell that the alcohol extract is pulling out more bitter smelling components than a tea. It might be pulling out more fresh type floral smelling components. And so there are different chemicals and different types of those solvents. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. All right, let's move on to red mulberry. Red mulberries are also delicious. If you happen to come across a mulberry tree, please eat them. They're so good. They taste like something between like raspberries and strawberries, like mixed together. It's delicious. You can fight the birds for your mulberries. But red mulberry is also a really nice medicinal plant. It's traditionally used for diabetes support and types of issues that arise from similar blood sugar regulation problems. So things like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, other types of inflammation, sometimes also hypertension. So red mulberry is very safe. It is food grade. You can eat it raw, or you can cook it, or you can extract it, however you want to prepare it. Let's see. If you want the medicinal effect, particularly diabetes support, you do want the leaves, not the fruit. That's where all of our research is as far as red mulberry for diabetes support. So you'll want to use a tea of the leaves, I believe, for that. And there's a strong scientific studies for the relationship between these two, and also the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and sometimes that ties in with diabetes. So this is a really great plant for that. I think it's also safe enough for pregnant women. So this is a really nice plant. Okay, yes, so they are very delicious and they are quite safe. So please eat them. It will make your day much brighter and stain your tongue. Okay.
We had one question on the mulberries.
Yeah.
Someone said that it's a little hard to distinguish between the red and the white mulberries around here. And have also been hybridized. So would those hybridized and white mulberries leaves still have the same properties?
That is a great question. I'm not certain. I know that a lot of studies actually on diabetes were conducted with white mulberry. And I think it's certain parts of it have higher activity or lower activity for certain types of issues, depending on the plant. But I believe all types of mulberry have been shown to have activity for diabetes support. So it's probably useful regardless of the species for that. And I think the reference that I sent you all had Morus alba in it. That would be the white mulberry. Morus rubris is our red mulberry that's native. So the white mulberry is not native. All right, broadleaf plantain. This is an excellent plant. Plantain does so many things. I don't know why it does so many things, but it's kind of like a magic plant. It can be used for cuts, scratches, stings, bites. It can be used for bowel inflammation, ulcers, skin conditions. It's also a potent diuretic. So it is a very safe plant unless you are taking diuretics. So that's one of those contraindications that I talked about early on. You don't want to take a diuretic plant with a diuretic medication because then you're double dipping. So you do want to be careful on this. It will make you pee a little bit more than normal because it's a diuretic. So preparation of plantain, I would highly recommend that you use this one as an alcohol extract as opposed to a tea. 40% seems to work fine. If you need to go a little stronger, you're more than welcome to do that. It can also be used topically as a poultice. So if you use the alcohol and you make your extract in your little bottle, I would highly recommend that you use the top part of the tincture. I don't know why it does this, but from my experience, if you use the top part, this is where all of the chemicals tend to reside. Once I get to the bottom of the bottle, it just doesn't work as well. So for plantain, for some reason, I feel like more of the active constituents are up here at the top. It might have something to do with like maybe oils in the plant being at the top and not at the bottom. So I'd recommend that. So it might be good if you're using it medicinally to replace your tincture after a while when you get towards the bottom, because it might not be as chemically active. So internally, if you wanted to use it internally, you'd want to use the alcohol. And that can be used for bowel inflammation, in particular ulcers. It's quite good for any types of bowel swelling. I use it actually for acne, so for skin conditions. It tends to be pretty drying. So if you are a dry person, you'll know this if I'm talking about you, like if you have dry skin, dry mouth, all those types of dry things, I would not recommend this plant. It's pretty drying. But if you tend to be somebody who's got a lot of fluids, that sort of thing, this can be an excellent plant for you. It's also a diuretic, so it does help you expel moisture as well through that type of mechanic. Topically, this plant can be used as a poultice. So you see it over here on the hand picture. That's what a poultice looks like. And so if you want to make a poultice, this is for external application. So if you happen to get stung by a bee, you should probably have some plantain nearby. It grows everywhere. It's like in everybody's yard. We're talking about particularly the native version, but there are like 3 other types of plantain that grow around here. 2 of them are not native, and they all do pretty similar things. So you can grab some plantain from your yard because it's probably just hanging out there. And what you want to do is you want to chew the leaf, and then you spit it back out and slap it on the cut or the sting. And when you chew it up in your mouth, the enzymes in your mouth help break down the plants and help release the chemical constituents. So it is pretty important actually that you chew it as opposed to like just cutting it up into little pieces and putting it on there. I know it's like not as sterile, but it actually works better when you're using it for this type of stuff. So mosquito bites, cuts, stings, bruises, it's really, really great for wound healing. Traditionally, Native Americans actually used it for snake bites to help remove the poison from snake bites. So this is a super useful plant just because of how it grows everywhere, and it can be used for all of these things. Let's see. Okay, so identification. Again, we have our native variety here, but there are so many varieties of this plant, and it actually grows like all over the world. So pretty much anywhere you can go, you can probably find some type of plantain. And the one that we have that grows here that's native is Plantago rugelli. And the way you tell this plant apart from the other ones is the red base of the plant. So hopefully you can see it here in this picture. The red one is native at the base. The one that's not red is not native. And this is Plantago major. And it also tends to be around. I think also the seed pods are a little different. So in the top left, I have a picture of the seed pods of Plantago rugelli, and that should look a little bit different than the Plantago major. Do we have any questions about plantain? Okay, this is a great plant. This is also another good beginner plant. So if you want to practice making poultices, it can be kind of fun to chew stuff up and spit it out. Everybody looks at you weird and you're like, no, I swear it works. So next time you're out in your garden and you get a little cut or a sting or something, feel free to give it a try. It is also an antibacterial plant, so you don't have to worry about having that issue with an open wound, putting it on an open wound quite so much. I would be careful doing it for a long amount of time, but if it's just a small little nick, it's not gonna bother it. All right, wild violet is the last plant that I had for us to talk about. This is also a really lovely plant. It's so pretty, and you can use it as food, actually. It is a food grade plant. You can just eat it straight as it is. A lot of recipes, if you look up wild violets, they'll actually use the flowers for stuff. I think the flowers actually kind of taste gross. I really like the leaves. The leaves are kind of like spinach. They're kind of soft. They've got a lot of moisture in them, and they are tiny, little bit slimy, which is, I think, part of why it's used typically as a demulcent. So a demulcent is a type of chemical or a type of property, a medicinal property, where something kind of like coats your throat. And so wild violet leaves are typically used for that because of that kind of slimy propensity that they have. It's also a very, very mild lymphatic and very, very mild, I would like sleep support. It'll make you just it's a tiny bit drowsy. So it can kind of help with that if you need that effect. Again, it's edible. I typically use it as a tea if I want to take it medicinally. I have not messed around with the tinctures, so I don't know if it would be effective as a tincture. But I would highly recommend eating this plant in salads or sauteed anytime you find yourself hungry and out and about and see it. Okay. All right, so I think that's it for all the plants that I have. If you all have any questions, now would be a great time to ask them.
Yeah, I
Maybe
will run
we
us
can-
through some.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kenny. You got it.
I'll run us through some of the questions we have in the Q&A.
Okay.
At the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about using these with blood thinners. What about taking aspirin as a blood thinner?
Okay. Yes, that's a good question. I mean, if you're using aspirin specifically for that effect, then you probably should talk to your pharmacist. You can talk to your doctor too, but a pharmacist should be able to answer that question. They are trained in knowing how, how to advise you on combinations of pharmaceuticals and herbs.
Great. The next one, do the aerial parts also include the petals?
Yes, they do. Yes. Oh, wait, for the Echinacea. For the Echinacea, no, I think they tested the flower. It was just the stems and the leaves. Sorry.
Okay, so that's for the purple cone flower, correct?
Okay. Yes.
And again, we will be sending out all of those studies to you guys. So if you'd like to do more research yourselves, please feel free to dig into all of that stuff.
Yeah, feel free to double check me on that. It is in the paper.
Is the yellow passion flower the same in its action as the passion flower you discussed today?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would have to know. I'd have to check the Latin name and make sure that it's the same plant. Yeah, that's what I would do. I'd check the Latin name on the plant and make sure it's if it's like a hybrid or some kind of other variety, whether it's the same one or not.
Great. Well, just moving through our list of plants, have any other lobelia been studied for their medicinal properties?
I don't think so. I think just the Lobelia Inflata. There might be some work on red cardinal flower, which is also a lobelia. But research was kind of hard to find for that plant. So I imagine that finding it for another plant that's not well known for its medicinal effect might be even harder. That's a good question.
Great. And when collecting leaves for the plants, are there any leaves in particular that you should be looking out for? Should you be looking for a mature one? Should you be looking for new ones? Any difference in that?
Let's see. I think it depends on the plant. I tend to use mature leaves for things. I'm not sure I've experimented much with that. But they should still work similarly. There might be slight differences between them based on their age. Like I know that pokeweed in particular, the younger plants tend to be not as toxic as older plants. So that's definitely a chemical difference there in the plant makeup. But I don't know. I haven't quite experimented with that.
Back to the passion flower. For making a tea, what would you recommend for dosage for fresh or dried leaves?
A really great question. I haven't used passion flower very much. I'm gonna ask, if you want, you can send me an email. I have a book that has that. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Yeah, send me an email if you want, and I'd be happy to share that info with you. Actually, let me see if I can find the book. Let me stop sharing my screen really quick. There's a really nice book that might have that info for you. Let's see if I can find it. If you want, you can go ahead and ask me the next question while I'm looking.
Yes. Do you have any suggestions for good online classes, probably or books to learn about growing and making your own herbal medicine?
Let's see. I think it's called learningherbs.com. I know that sounds a little sketchy, but I think it's, yes, Learning Herbs. If you are a beginner, I would highly recommend this website. This is put together by herbalists, and they have some really great video courses and things like that. It can be hard to get good information when you're starting to learn herbs. So I would recommend them for a good like source to start. I think it's pretty low cost, but they do have like a subscription. I think it might be like $1 or so to subscribe. That's a really good place to go. Anything else?
Yes. If you start with a small dose and you don't get much of an effect, will adding to the tincture mean that you need to wait another few weeks to use it again?
No. Most herbs are pretty immediate in their effect. So yeah, most herbs, if you take them as a tea or tincture, they should work pretty fast. There are a few exceptions to that. So if you're using an herb for anti-anxiety or maybe an antidepressant effect, a lot of those can be slow to onset, the same way a lot of your antidepressant medications can. So if you've ever been on an antidepressant medication like an SSRI or something like that, the doctor will typically tell you you need to take this for like a week or two before your system will start to feel it. And that can be the same for your antidepressant herbs, because they typically work in similar fashions. So I think most herbs, though, are very fast in how they work. So if you don't feel it within like a minute or two after you take the tea or tincture, you probably need a little bit more. But you do want to be careful about those bowel effects, because if it's going to maybe mess with your bowels a little bit, it might not be immediate. It might be 10-15 minutes later after your stomach moves around a little bit. So yeah, hopefully that'll give you a timeline for that.
I'm looking at how that question is worded, and I wonder if the person was suggesting that they were going to strengthen the tincture itself and put more herb into the tincture. But I think if I understood you correctly, if a small dose doesn't work, you should just take more drops of the tincture, right? Or do you want to make the tincture itself stronger?
Yeah, just take more drops. Just take more drops. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, that should be fine. Herbs are pretty strong.
Is there like a expiration date on those tinctures at all?
Yes, there is. It depends on the plant. It's plant specific. I would recommend, for determining that, kind of pay attention to the smell. So if you make a tincture or a tea, if it has a good medicinal property, it should still smell like the plants. If it's expired, it may smell more like just alcohol with no plant material in it, or just like kind of fresh, but not necessarily the smell of that plant. It might also be just the fresh plant. If you have dried plant like this, if it's not the color that it's supposed to be, this is hops that I have right here, and it's a little green and brown, because that is the color that I picked them at. But if I came by and my plant was like all entirely brown, maybe it's expired at that point, because it's not quite as intact as it used to be. I'd recommend smell. It really does differ for every plant. I have some plants that I've had for like 10 years in a tincture and they're still fine. But then I have other plants that after a year, they don't work anymore and I have to retincture them. That actually might be a good, learning herbs might be a good place to learn things like that, actually, because those are very specific.
Great, thank you. And then we had a couple of questions on recommended dosage for fresh versus dried leaves.
So I think it depends again on what you want to use it for. Fresh is going to be stronger. Dried depends on the plant. Sometimes it's the same strength, sometimes it's weaker. In general, fresh is going to be stronger. But again, that depends on how you prepare it. Like if you have a fresh plant and you want to keep those volatile components in it from the fresh plant, then you need to tincture it, or make the tea immediately, right? But the tea is always going to be composed of dried plants, unless you're going outside and picking it immediately and making the tea. And I think that's a difference in chemical constituents. So for example, I use lavender a lot. It's not a native plant, but lavender I make both a tea and a tincture of because they do different things. So the tea is very drowsy and it will put you to sleep really easily. The tincture, however, is more bitter and it doesn't have quite so much drowsiness effect to it. It tends to be more like relaxing as opposed to like knock you out really hard. And that's a difference in the chemical constituents in those components. So hopefully that answered the question.
Definitely, thank you. And the last question we have in the chat, do you happen to know any uses for autumn olive?
Oh, autumn olive, I don't think it's medicinal, but it is edible. So if you just want to eat it, you're welcome to eat the berries. They're kind of bitter and sour though. They're almost like a crab apple. They're not super tasty, but you can use them. I think I looked into medicinal uses for autumn olive and I didn't find any. Another thing to note about autumn olive is that it's a very invasive species, at least in our area in Virginia. It's not native.
So eat it all if you can, is what she's
saying. Yes, please. Put it down with an axe.
One question that I have from you just going through this stuff, what is the process you use to dry these plants to use them year round?
Oh, that's a good question. So when you're drying plants, a couple things are important. You kind of want them in a dark place and you want a dry area. So and you want good airflow over them. So you don't want to put them like in a closed container that doesn't get airflow or the moisture will stay in the plant material. So what I tend to do, it's very high tech. I take a cardboard box and I put the plants in it and then I let them sit there for a couple weeks. And that usually does the trick. I put them in like a dark, cool, dry location in the house, and that'll usually work for you. And then you can just kind of go and feel them and see when they're done. Some plants this works good for. Other ones you might need a different method. You want to make sure that you space them out really well. So you don't want like layers of the plant on top. You really want them in like a single layer on like just a sheet kind of. So a big flat cardboard box usually works really good.
Great, thank you so much. And as you're answering, one person just put in the chat if you knew anything about feverfew.
Feverfew. Oh, I haven't used it extensively, but I do know that's typically used for headache support. So if you have some type of headache, particularly if it's onset by like heat, people tend to use feverfew for that.